Go time. Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about how do you lock down your Power App form to where it's safe for your end users to submit information and other people to use your same form to submit information. And you don't have this data leak where someone who's not authorized is seeing someone else's requests or information that's being stored in your list, or possibly information that is submitted in your list or is actually brought up in the search results inadvertently. And the people that's using your list actually have the right permissions. So if you could take a look here, we know that to fire up one of these Power App forms is actually super easy. And probably within a matter of a few minutes, you can create a Power App custom form that has a lot of cool bells and whistles, user friendly, very easy to interact with. And you're actually solving a problem, you're adding value to the business. And a piece that most of the app makers overlook when designing these Power App solutions is to make sure that they're locked down to where you don't have people seeing other people's items, and you only give your users the minimum requirement. So let's talk about 5 steps that are needed. The first one, I would say the first thing you want to do is to make sure that the permissions are correct. Normally, when I set these up, I only give the user edit permissions or contribute permissions to the list and only read access to the actual site. So in this section here, in this site, all of my users will only have read access. And you can see that I actually have a sub-site that is dedicated for this app. So you give them read access to the site, and then on the list itself. So if you go to list settings and then you look at the permissionings for this list, you will notice by default, because they're in the visitors group, they're actually going to have read access to this list, which is not what you want. You want them to be able to actually submit items and entries. So the first thing you want to do is break inheritance here, go to the visitors list, change the visitors group, change permissioning on that. So you edit permissions, and you're going to have several options. If they are a member, they're going to get edit access by default. If they're in the members group, which is one of the things I recommend against, because the edit access would give them the ability to modify columns, modify views. They can actually add columns to your solution, which the end user shouldn't have that type of access. So the minimum edit capabilities that they need is actually contribute. So I would give them contribute access, and then so everyone in this visiting your site would be able to interact with this list. So here I have in a separate window, I'm switching over to the Andre Rose profile. And if I hit refresh, now Andre has the ability to come in here and now submit his own parking request in this scenario. But the problem with Andre is that he can see other requests that were submitted by other users or colleagues within the organization, which is in some scenarios is probably a big no-no, especially if you're creating a custom solution for like HR or any solution, as I mentioned before, that may have confidential or personal information. You don't want other people interacting with your solution to be able to see that. So that takes me to the next step. So once you give them edit access to where they can submit their own requests, the next thing you want to do, and actually I think this is probably the first thing you should do, you want to go back to list settings, and then under the advanced settings tab, they have this item level permissions that you can turn on or off, or you can make different adjustments. And then here, very quick, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on what all of these options would do, but it's 2 main points you should take away. First, if you turn on the read access, it say items created by the user. What this is going to do, this is actually going to lock them down to where they can only see the items that they created. So in our scenario with Andre, if I go back to this list with the Andre profile and hit refresh, now you see us locked down to only the item that Andre actually submitted. So if I click on this, this is actually the request by Andre Rose, the request by Deshaun, Madison, Ashley, and other members of the organization. Andre cannot see those. So that's what the read access items would do for you. Now, the other option you can select is that allow them to read all, but only be able to modify the ones that they submitted. And this may be like, say, for example, if you're creating a list of maybe great ideas or a big idea or maybe an idea or suggestion bank, you want people in the organizations that's interacting with your solution to be able to see all of the items that were submitted. But when it comes to modifications, they should not be able to edit or modify any item that they did not create. So here I can, this is, it's interesting to yeah, see, it stopped me, but I thought that was weird that it allowed me to get that far. It allowed me to select edit, make a modification, but when you click save, SharePoint's actually going to catch and say you can't actually modify it. So they can actually come in here and view all of the items submitted in the list, but they cannot edit any item except for the one that they created. So that's the edit option there. All right. So now so in our scenario, what we only want them to be able to read and edit the items that they created. And you notice that I said create and edit all items, but the fact that I have them locked down to the way they only can see the items that they created is great. And I don't have to double select the other edit options. So that's the other one. So the other one is that make sure you lock it down to where they can only see the items that they modify and or they can see everything, but only be able to edit the ones that they created. So that's really up to you what is the best mix for your piece. Now, once we lock that down, the problem we're going to have now is that if I lock them down to where only they can see their items, you would notice that the Deshaun Clark profile, which is the admin, can still see everyone's items. And that's because the admin or the approver of your solution, they have to be able to see all the items because they have to be able to see it to approve it or modify it or wherever the case may be. Now, you don't necessarily want to make all of your approvers full control over your site or maybe full control over your list. So what you can do, you can modify the permissions for that list. And usually this is what I do. For the permissioning for the approvers, I would actually create a separate group. So I would come in here and say, okay, let me go ahead and create another group. So let me go to the gear icon, site settings, go to the people and groups here, and then actually create a new group. I was actually expecting that create group on the list, but here I can create a group, and now I can say parking requests approvers, right? And then I can go ahead and select allow all the default options. And then here I can go ahead and add in whoever should be the approver. So let's just say Madison as an example. So I add Madison in. I don't want to send her an invite. And now if I go back to my list, let me go back to my parking request list here and going to the permissioning for this list. Now I can bring in that approver group. So let's just say parking request approvers, and then give them the right permissioning level. Now, the minimum permissions that they need is design permissions. That will enable all the approvers to be able to view all of the requests. And that's something that you have to do because once they start getting these emails that says, Deshaun is requesting a parking spot or Andre Rose is requesting a parking spot, the approvers have to be able to see the item, though they did not create it. So that's how you get around that. So it's kind of a two-step process. One is to lock it down to where people can only see what they submitted. But then for the approvers, make sure they have minimum design permission level so that way they can see all the requests in order to approve them. Now, here, let's switch over back to Andre. Now we got Andre locked down pretty good. He can only see the items that he submitted. The problem is that when we go through our custom form, you would notice that we're very careful to only present those site columns that the end user should be filling out. But with a SharePoint list, all of the columns are available. So we don't want Andre to come in here and modify like the approver column or modify any data that did not go through our form by interacting with the list directly. Now, the one way that they can do this, and this is one by default, is the quick edit option. So you can see here, I can have the quick edit option and come in here and modify those site columns that are not part of or purposely hidden in my custom Power App form. And Andre can come in here and modify that. So what we want to do is make sure we turn off that quick edit. So to turn off the quick edit, you want to go to the gear icon. I'm sorry, I was on the wrong screen. So hit settings in the list settings section. Under advanced settings, it's actually right here in the same screen where we did itemized permissioning. The category, the setting name is called quick property editing. Go ahead and turn that off, set that to no, and then hit refresh. And now what Andre, once I refresh this, the quick edit option is not available. So we're forcing him to use our custom Power App form in order to interact with this data. And though he can see all of the other attributes and site columns within the list, he won't be able to modify them. And we're kind of forcing him down the path of using our custom Power App. Okay, so I think that is, let me just make sure. So we talked about permissioning. We talked about turning off the quick edit. We talked about hiding to only where they can make their changes. And I think, I want to say, I think that's it. Now, there is some other questions that usually come up like, okay, from my end users, they have this Power App option. Would they be able to modify my custom form? And the answer is no. If you give them only the contribute or edit permissions and you don't give them design or full control over your list, they will not be able to modify your Power App form. So they will still see these options, but there's nothing they can do with it. Even with the Power Automate, they can come in here and see all the flows that they personally as a user created, but they won't have access unless you explicitly grant them access to modify the flow that you have as far as your solution. So I know some organizations or some admins will like to hide these options here, but I would say there's no harm, no foul with showing them because they cannot use them to modify your form. All right, so that's it with just quick tips on how you should be locking down your Power App forms. Like I mentioned before, they're very easy. They're very quick to set up and get configured, but we have to ensure that we protect the data, we protect our users' information, and we only give our end users the needed information that they need to just interact with our solution and nothing more than that. Okay, so in the next session, what we're going to do, let's talk about the approval process and what does that look like when we actually have different approvers or maybe some logic that says, okay, if you're requesting a parking spot from this parking lot, who should be the requester for that particular parking lot, and what are some of the gotchas or techniques, tips and tricks techniques that we have to use in Power Automate in order for that approval process to work. All right, that's it for this quick video. Just quick tip on how to lock down your Power App forms. I'll see you in the next session. Take care.